Story 1. Me and my older brother Cameron were camping on the East Coast. He picked the spot like he always did, and I just tagged along. He had a good eye for these things, though. The campsite was nice, secluded, quiet. Since we had to hike in, it wasn't crowded. Actually, from what we could see, it wasn't occupied at all. No signs of anyone. The site itself wasn't well defined. No markers, no designated spaces. Just a few small clearings in the trees that could have been the right place. We figured it didn't matter. We picked a grassy opening and set up camp. At first, everything seemed normal. But after a while, we started noticing things. Small, forgotten things. A single trekking pole. An old pair of shoes. Scraps of gear left behind. Not the kind of stuff you usually find in a place like this. People don't just leave things out here. Not this far into the woods. We both thought it was weird, but we shrugged it off. As night fell, we built a fire. Sat around it, talking, laughing, eating. A few hours passed. Then I saw something behind Cameron. A flicker of movement. A light. I pointed. "Look!" He turned, and we both squinted through the trees. A small fire. It was distant, barely visible through the black tangle of branches. Just a tiny orange flame, flickering. If the moonlight hadn't been swallowed up by the clouds, we probably wouldn't have seen it at all. So we weren't alone. That was fine. A little strange, maybe, since the area beyond that fire was just dense forest. No clearings. No trails leading out that way. But some people like their privacy. We didn't think much of it. We grabbed some snacks, some drinks, talked until exhaustion took over, put out the fire, went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep fast. No trouble at all. Then, at some point in the night, I woke up. I knew exactly why. I'd had too much to drink. Groggy, half-dazed. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Walked about 50 feet away from camp to take care of business. That's when I saw it. The fire, still burning. For some reason, I just stood there, staring at it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe something else. I don't know. But as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I noticed something else. A figure, between me and the distant fire. My chest clenched. My first thought, just a trick of the light. A weirdly shaped bush. No way it was an actual person. Then I saw more of them. Scattered through the trees. Dark shapes. Motionless. Watching. 15, maybe more. Just standing there, staring in our direction. I felt sick. My skin prickled all over. My body screamed, "This isn't right." I turned and rushed back to the tent. For a second, I debated waking Cameron. If I was imagining things, he'd never let me live it down. But my gut told me otherwise. I reached for his shoulder, shook him awake. "Cameron!" My voice came out hoarse. He groaned. "What?" "I saw something." He blinked up at me, confused. I could tell he wanted to brush it off. But something in my voice must have changed his mind. He sighed, sat up, and followed me outside. We didn't get far. They had moved. The figures were closer now, spread out between the trees, barely visible in the darkness. I swallowed hard. My breath caught. I turned to Cameron. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He saw them too. That's when I knew this was real. They weren't bushes. They weren't tricks of the light. They were people, and they were watching us. We started backing up, slow. Cameron's voice shook. "Should we leave?" Hearing him sound scared, that terrified me more than anything. I nodded. Neither of us grabbed our gear, just the car keys, our wallets. We moved fast, hurrying down the trail, expecting at any second to hear footsteps behind us. But nothing followed. When we reached safety, we went straight to the police. Reported everything. They didn't take us seriously. Thought we were crazy. Like a whole group of people creeping in the woods at night was just impossible. We brought up the abandoned gear at the site. Told them others had probably seen the same thing. But no reports had ever been filed. No missing persons. No records of anything strange. Maybe people just never talked about it. Or maybe they never made it back. Story 2. This was 2 years ago in the middle of spring. I had taken time off work to go camping at a small lake in northern Minnesota. It was a place I'd been to a couple of times, sometimes with friends, sometimes with family, but this time it was just me. The hike to get there took about 2 hours, though it wasn't too rigorous. Mostly a flat trail all the way in. I set up my tent a bit into the woods, not right up against the lake, just far enough to feel tucked away. Then I unfolded my chair, popped open a beer, and let the sounds of the water and birds sink into me. It was late in the day already, the sun sliding lower. I didn't have much time before it got dark. But I liked the woods at night. Always had. There was something freeing about it, the deep quiet, the way the world felt. Paused. But this night was different. Once the sun dipped, I built up a fire, let it crackle and glow as I settled in. That's when the feeling hit me, like eyes in the dark. Watching, I kept glancing into the trees, searching the shadows between them. The unease crawled up my spine, a slow, creeping thing. I wasn't usually like this. I didn't scare easy. I told myself it was nothing. The dark plays tricks, that's all. Still, I couldn't shake it. The forest stretched out around me, endless black between the trunks, and I kept thinking, if something was there, I wouldn't even know. I forced myself to relax, turning my mind to other things, personal things. Not exactly pleasant distractions, but better than paranoia. Hours passed. Maybe 10, maybe 11. That's when I heard it. Crack, loud, close, right in front of me. A branch snapping under something heavy. The firelight didn't reach that far. It was just blackness out there. My whole body went rigid. My breath stopped. Animal? Person? I didn't know which scared me more. Slowly, I reached for my bear spray, gripping it tight. My voice came out rough, too dry. Hello? Someone out there? Silence. Not even the wind. Not even the rustling of leaves. If it had been an animal, I would have heard something, movement, breathing, a shuffle of paws against dirt. But there was nothing. I sat there, heart pounding, staring into the dark. A minute passed. 2. I remembered my flashlight, fumbled for it. My fingers clumsy, cold. When I finally clicked it on and swept it forward, the beam cut through the trees. Nothing. No movement. No shape. No eyes glinting back at me. Still, the feeling hadn't left. If anything, it was worse. I fed the fire, stacking more wood, making it blaze higher. I wanted light, as much as I could get. Every few minutes, I flicked the flashlight back on, scanning the treeline. And then, on one of those sweeps, I saw him, a man, at the far edge of the light. Tall, freakishly tall. Not inhuman, but close, 6 feet 5 inches, maybe taller. Thick, solid. He moved the instant my light hit him, slipping backward into the dark like he was never there. My stomach dropped. My whole body went hot, then ice cold. The sound I'd heard earlier, that massive crack, he must have made it. And if he had, then he'd been standing out there all this time, watching me. I didn't think. I just moved. I tore down my tent, stuffing my gear into my pack with shaking hands. I didn't even check what I grabbed. Just shoved, shoved, shoved. I knew which way he'd gone, so I ran the other way, back toward my car. The first few minutes were panic, pure panic, running on adrenaline. But eventually, I forced myself to slow, turning my flashlight to the dim setting so I wouldn't be a beacon in the dark. As I walked, my mind raced. Why had he been there? What did he want? If he'd wanted to attack me, he could have. He was huge, easily 250 pounds. He could have rushed me, overpowered me. But he didn't. He waited, watched. Maybe he was trying to see if I was armed. Maybe he was waiting for me to fall asleep. I don't know. I don't want to know. I made it to my car and drove home. I still go camping, but it's not the same. Now, whenever I sit by the fire, listening to the night, I get that feeling again, that crawling, skin-prickling paranoia, like I'm being watched. Maybe I am. Story 3. This happened a while ago. I want to say 2014. I live in a pretty woodsy town, like with lots of forest around it and plenty of small campgrounds within an hour or so. I had a 4-day weekend off from work, and I hadn't gotten out in a while, so I decided to head to one of these campgrounds for a laid-back weekend camping trip. The campground I chose was a small one where you park in a small dirt area and choose one of the 3 sites they had to set up your tent at. There were already fire pits set up and even some grills and benches. They looked awful, but I guess some people still use them. All 3 spots were open though, and no other cars were there, so I just chose the one on the far left and put all my things over there. The walk from my truck to the campsite was only about 5 minutes, but the area was very densely covered in trees, so it still felt like I was fully in the woods. Plus, the actual camping ground was about 45 minutes from town as well. It was about an hour in that I realized I had no idea what to do. Like, should I just sit here and relax or read a book? I didn't really know. I thought maybe there was a trail or something I could walk on. So I went back to where the entrance was to see if there was anything. There wasn't, but there was another car next to mine now. It was an old red Toyota. Like really old, rusted all around with dents and scratches all over. And one really strange thing I noticed about it was it didn't have a license plate on either the front or the back. I didn't really know what to think, but I figured they must have been camping at one of the other spots. With no trail though, I went back to my campsite and just sat on a log. After only 10 minutes, I heard footsteps coming up behind me. I looked back. There was a guy walking down the trail. He had no backpack or anything, and he was looking right at me like he was coming down just to talk to me or ask me something. The man looked like he was in his 30s, but he almost looked older because of how he was put together, or rather, not put together. His brown jacket had holes all over it and was covered in stains, and his beard and hair were oily and shaggy. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he asked. Having nothing to do, I said, "Sure," and stood up. But he quickly said, "Thank you," and that he was just asking for now. He still had some things to do first, but he was going to come back in a little bit and get me when he needed a hand. I said, "Okay," and he thanked me again, then walked away. I wasn't too sure why he came by if he didn't need me right now, but I figured he probably just had to unpack his car first and would be back in 10 or 15 minutes. I sat and waited, but a half hour passed, and then another. By then, the sun was going down, and I thought he must have gotten it done himself, whatever it was. 2 hours later, I'd completely forgotten about it. I had the fire pit lit up and was making my dinner when I heard footsteps behind me again. I looked back, but this time it was eerily dark. I could hear his footsteps coming down the trail, but he was completely covered in darkness. I couldn't even see his silhouette. I listened to the crunching steps against the gravel slowly make their way into the light of my campfire. It was the same man, just as I thought. I didn't understand why he came back though. It was so late now. "Hey, you ready? Just need a little help still," he said. With what?" I asked, noticing my hesitation. "It'll only take a minute. You aren't busy by the looks of it," he said jokingly with a smile, but it felt odd, like he was being pushy. He also avoided my question. My social awkwardness kind of failed me here though because I nervously agreed, knowing I really had nothing else to do, and it was obvious. He smiled again and started leading the way. As we got further from my campfire, it got way darker, and I realized how odd it was that he walked here without a flashlight. It also felt strange following him into the dark. "Hey, so what was it you needed my help for?" I asked. He slowed down for a split second, like he was going to say something, but then he continued walking and didn't answer. I felt my heart rate spiking. My body knew something was wrong. Suddenly, the silence of the forest around me felt disturbingly eerie, like a calm before the storm. I began slowing down, trying to put some distance between us without it being too obvious. I only managed to get a few feet away before he turned around and looked at me. He had a creepy fake smile that immediately shifted into a frown when he saw me further away. He stopped walking, and so did I. Before I could say anything, I saw his hand reach down into his jacket, and I immediately turned and sprinted deeper into the woods after just seeing the handle of what I could only assume was a knife. I could hear his footsteps pounding against the ground and his heavy breathing as he chased me through the dark for probably a good 2 minutes. He started slowing down, and eventually, it was just the sound of me running through the woods. Luckily, I had my phone and keys on me, so I called 911. When they got to the camping grounds, only my truck was there. The red car was gone, and so was the man. I described everything for them, as both the car and the man had such a distinct look, but that information wasn't enough. I think it's pretty clear what was about to happen that night, but there doesn't seem to be any reason why, aside from the fact that I was camping alone. The way the man waited until night to try it and how he came by during the day so that I'd be more likely to follow him later is terrifyingly man.